The sun was beginning its descent behind the hills, casting a warm, golden glow over the small town of Shanghabad. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that made the world feel still, like time itself had taken a deep breath and paused. The gentle hum of crickets filled the air, mingling with the soft rustle of the trees. In the heart of this tranquil town lived Ayaan, a young man in his late 20s, with a calm demeanor and a warm smile. He was the kind of person people found easy to talk to. He was a teacher at the local school, a place where he had worked for the past 5 years. He loved his job. His students adored him, and he had earned the respect of the community. There was something about his quiet kindness that drew people in, and for Ayaan, the simplicity of his life was enough. He didn't need fame or fortune, just a purpose and people to share it with. But life, as it often does, has a way of shifting without warning. On this particular evening, Ayaan sat at his small kitchen table, sipping tea as he glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 7 p.m., and his wife, Meher, hadn't come home yet. She was usually back by this time. Meher was a school counselor, a woman with an infectious laugh and a heart that seemed as big as the world. She was the kind of person who would listen to anyone's problems, offering advice and comfort in equal measure. Ayaan always admired her strength, her ability to handle whatever life threw at her with grace. But today, something felt off. He set the teacup down gently and stood up, his fingers brushing the keys of his phone, checking for any messages. There was nothing from Meher. His brow furrowed in concern. She was never late without telling him. Maybe something had come up at work. It wasn't unusual for her to stay late to help a student, but this felt different. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Ayaan's heart skipped a beat as he moved towards it. When he opened the door, it wasn't Meher standing there. Instead, it was the school principal, Mr. Rashid. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with a look Ayaan had never seen before. "Mr. Ayaan," Rashid said, his voice trembling. "There's been an accident." Ayaan's heart raced, his stomach dropping to his feet. What happened? His voice was barely a whisper, his thoughts already racing ahead, though he was afraid to say it aloud. "It's Meher, she was in a car accident." Rashid's voice broke as he spoke, and Ayaan felt the world around him begin to spin. The words hung in the air like a dense fog, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Ayaan stood frozen, staring at the principal, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. His mind was fighting the reality of it. Meher, the love of his life, the woman who had always been his anchor, the one person he couldn't imagine living without, in an accident? His chest tightened, and a cold sweat began to form on his brow. Is she all right?" he managed to choke out. The principal looked down, unable to meet Ayaan's eyes. His silence spoke volumes, and in that moment, Ayaan felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Ayaan didn't hear anything else. His world had already begun to crumble, the weight of those words pressing down on him like a crushing wave. Without saying another word, he turned and ran out of the house, his breath shallow and quick. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get to Meher. The night air was biting as he raced toward the hospital, his thoughts clouded by a mix of fear and disbelief. His legs moved faster than he had ever thought possible, driven by an instinct he didn't know he had. But with each step, he felt the distance between him and her growing larger, and the darkness around him deepening. As he reached the hospital, Ayaan's heart hammered in his chest, his hands trembling as he entered the emergency room. He ran up to the nurse at the desk, gasping for air. "My wife, Meher, where is she? Is she okay?" The nurse looked up at him, her face tight with concern. "Are you Mr. Ayaan?" she asked, as if she were afraid to say the words aloud. He nodded, the lump in his throat growing larger. "I'm so sorry," the nurse said softly. "She didn't make it." The words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of his chest. He felt his knees go weak, and he collapsed into the nearest chair, his body shaking uncontrollably. Meher, the woman who had shared his life for the last 5 years, was gone. In an instant, everything that had once felt so certain, so secure, had been ripped away. The world felt like it was caving in on him, and all he could do was sit there, staring at the floor, unable to move, to think, to breathe. The storm had come, and Ayaan was left alone, drowning in a sea of grief, unable to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. His life, once so full of hope and promise, now felt like an endless void, a place where light and warmth no longer existed. In that moment, Ayaan's journey through pain and loss began, a journey that would take him through the darkest corners of his soul and, eventually, into the light once more. But for now, all he could do was sit in that sterile hospital room, trying to make sense of the storm that had just torn his world apart. The days that followed were a blur. Ayaan barely remembered leaving the hospital or how he made his way back home. It felt like he was moving through a fog, each step heavy, like the ground was pulling him down. The world around him seemed too bright, too loud, too real. Everything except the emptiness in his chest felt like it was happening to someone else. He hadn't been able to bring himself to call anyone. The neighbors, his friends, even his family, they all knew about Meher's accident, but the thought of speaking to them, of telling them what had happened, felt like an insurmountable task. His phone sat silent on the kitchen counter, untouched for hours, its screen reflecting the void he felt inside. Ayaan sat in the living room, staring at the spot where Meher used to sit every evening, her laughter filling the air as she chatted about her day. That spot was now a hollow space, cold and lifeless. The house felt too big, too quiet. Her absence echoed in every corner. He hadn't even cried yet. It was as though his body had shut down, unable to process the grief, unable to let the floodgates open. His mind kept replaying the moment at the hospital, the cold, detached way the nurse had told him the news. She didn't make it. Those words kept ringing in his ears, over and over, like a song that never stopped playing. The silence in the house was oppressive. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street. It was dusk again, and the world outside seemed so normal. People walking home from work, children playing in the park. Life was still happening, but Ayaan felt as though his had come to a standstill. Everything reminded him of her. The mug she had used every morning for tea, now sitting abandoned on the counter. Her favorite book, half finished, lying on the coffee table. The scent of her perfume still lingering in the bedroom. How could it be that she was no longer here, that she was gone, and he was left with nothing but these remnants of the life they had shared? His knees buckled, and he sank down onto the couch, his hands clutching at his chest. He wanted to scream, to hit something, to tear apart everything around him. But all he could do was sit there, paralyzed by the weight of it all. The phone rang. Ayaan didn't even look at the screen. He knew it was someone calling to check on him, to offer their condolences. He let it ring, not wanting to speak to anyone, not wanting to hear their sympathy. What could anyone say that would ease this pain? What could anyone say that would bring Meher back? But the phone kept ringing, relentless. Finally, with a shaky hand, he picked it up. Ayaan, it's Rashid. The voice on the other end said. I'm so sorry, man. I just wanted to check in on you. Is there anything I can do? Ayaan closed his eyes, his throat tight. No, he whispered. There's nothing. There's nothing anyone can do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Ayaan could almost feel Rashid's sadness through the phone. I know this is hard, but you don't have to go through this alone. There are people here for you, Ayaan. You can lean on us. The words were kind, but they felt distant, like they were coming from another world. Another life. I can't do this, Ayaan whispered. His voice cracked as he spoke. I can't imagine living without her. I don't know how. There was another pause, longer this time, before Rashid spoke again. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one moment at a time. It's okay to feel lost. But you can't let yourself stay there, Ayaan. You're stronger than this. You will get through this. It just takes time. Ayaan didn't respond. The words swirled in his mind, but they felt like nothing more than empty promises. How could he possibly believe in a future without Meher when everything he had known seemed to have evaporated in an instant? I don't know if I can, Ayaan muttered, his voice barely audible. Rashid sighed. I'm here for you, Ayaan. Don't shut us out. Let us help you. But Ayaan had already dropped the phone, the sound of Rashid's voice fading into nothingness as he sank deeper into the abyss of his grief. He felt disconnected from everything, from his friends, from his past, from himself. He couldn't see a way out of the darkness, couldn't find a reason to believe that life would ever have meaning again. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into days. Ayaan's routine had disintegrated. He couldn't bring himself to go to work, couldn't face the world outside. The quiet of the house was suffocating, and the loneliness was unbearable. He found himself wandering through the rooms, touching Meher's things as if by doing so, he could somehow bring her back, could feel her presence again. But it never worked. He began to lose track of time. It felt like he was moving through a dream, everything blurred and disconnected. The world outside continued to turn, but Ayaan was trapped in his own private hell, where nothing made sense, where everything that had once brought him comfort now felt foreign and distant. In the depths of his despair, Ayaan started to wonder if he would ever feel anything but this crushing weight, if the pain would ever stop, or if it would simply be a part of him, always there, like a shadow that never left. But even in the darkest depths of despair, there was a small, flickering light, a faint whisper, a nagging voice deep inside him that said, "You can't stay here forever. You have to move forward. You have to find a way." It was the smallest spark, barely noticeable, but it was there. And for the first time since that dreadful day, Ayaan wondered if it was possible to believe that, one day, the storm might pass. The days stretched on in a painful monotony. Time had lost its meaning. Ayaan woke up each morning, his eyes heavy, his body exhausted from the sleepless nights. His mind felt foggy, as if it were trapped in a place between reality and the dreamlike haze of his grief. He no longer noticed the passing of hours or the changing of the seasons. It all blended into one long, unending blur. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a tomb. Every corner was filled with reminders of Meher, the scent of her perfume still lingering on her pillow, her shoes by the door, her favorite mug sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. It was as though she had never left, and yet the empty spaces where she used to be screamed louder than any words. Ayaan found himself spending most of his days in the same chair, staring blankly out the window, watching the world move on without him. It seemed impossible that life could continue so effortlessly, so casually, while his world had shattered beyond repair. People went about their daily routines, children laughed and played, and birds flew across the sky. The simple beauty of it all mocked him. He couldn't understand how they could all carry on when his life had come to a standstill. The phone calls, the well-meaning messages, they had all stopped after a few weeks. The initial shock had worn off for everyone else, and now Ayaan was left alone with his grief. It was as if everyone had moved on with their lives, and he was the only one stuck, caught in a moment that refused to release him. Ayaan couldn't bring himself to speak to anyone. The thought of facing the world, of seeing their pity, made him feel small, weak, and ashamed. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the kindness of his friends and family. He did in his own way, but their concern only reminded him of the gaping hole that Meher had left behind. It was a hole that no one could fill, a wound too deep to heal. So he stayed inside, alone with his thoughts, his pain, and his ever-growing sense of isolation. Every now and then, Ayaan would try to force himself to do something, anything, to distract himself. He would sit down at his desk and attempt to grade papers or read the books that had once brought him comfort, but the words never made sense anymore. Everything felt distant, out of reach. His mind wandered endlessly, and all he could think about was the night Meher had died, the horror of seeing her so cold, so lifeless, in that sterile hospital room. He could still hear the sound of the heart monitor flatlining in his ears, could still feel the heaviness in his chest, as if it were happening all over again. Sometimes, when the silence grew unbearable, Ayaan would get up and walk aimlessly through the house, his footsteps echoing off the walls. He'd pass by the bedroom and see the empty side of the bed where Meher used to sleep, the pillow still indented with the shape of her head. He would stand there, staring at it, as though expecting her to return, to step through the door and fill the space with her laughter and warmth. But she never did. One afternoon, he stood by the window, watching the rain fall in soft, rhythmic patterns. The world outside looked different, muted, softened by the mist. The sky was overcast and the air was cool, thick with the scent of wet earth. It was the kind of day that made Ayaan want to disappear into the world outside, to forget everything that had happened. But he couldn't. The quiet settled over him again, wrapping itself around him like a suffocating blanket. His mind drifted to the times when Meher had been there beside him, when they would walk hand in hand down the street, laughing about something trivial, enjoying the simple pleasures of life. It had been enough then. And now it seemed so far away, like a dream he could no longer touch. Why couldn't I protect her? The thought came to him, sharp and relentless. Why wasn't I there? Why did I have to lose her? Ayaan had always prided himself on being strong, on being there for others when they needed him. He was the one who listened, the one who offered comfort. He had always been the reliable one, the stable one. But now, in the face of his own pain, he felt utterly helpless. He couldn't save Meher. He couldn't do anything to bring her back. The weight of that guilt hung over him like a storm cloud, threatening to suffocate him. Maybe if I had been there, maybe if I had just done something differently. Ayaan walked into the living room, his footsteps slow, deliberate. He sat down on the couch, his hands trembling as he reached for the photo album on the coffee table. The album was worn, the cover slightly frayed from years of use, but it still held the precious memories of their life together. He flipped through the pages, each photo a snapshot of their love, their wedding day, vacations they had taken together, family gatherings, quiet moments spent in each other's company. Each picture was a reminder of a time when everything had felt right. Tears welled up in Ayaan's eyes as he gazed at the photo of Meher on their honeymoon. She was laughing, her face radiant, her eyes sparkling with the kind of happiness Ayaan had thought would never fade. How could I have known it would end so suddenly? He thought, his chest tightening with grief. How could I have known I'd lose her so soon? He closed the album and placed it gently back on the table, his heart heavy with the weight of memories. He sat in silence, his thoughts swirling like a storm in his mind. The pain was unbearable, yes, but in a strange way, it was also comforting. The memories, the grief, the loss, it was all he had left of her. And as much as it hurt, it was a reminder that she had been real, that their love had been real. Ayaan closed his eyes and leaned back, letting the tears fall. He had no idea how long he sat there, lost in his sorrow, but in that moment, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his grief. It was the only way he could honor Meher's memory, by remembering the love they had shared, by letting the pain wash over him, by giving himself permission to feel everything that he had been holding inside. The days of isolation stretched on, but slowly, imperceptibly, Ayaan began to notice something. Amidst the pain, there was a small flicker of something else, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. He wasn't sure what it was, but in the quiet of his grief, Ayaan knew one thing for certain. He couldn't stay here forever. He didn't know how or when, but he had to keep moving forward. The storm inside Ayaan was not over. His grief still came in waves, each one crashing over him with no warning, drowning him in sorrow. Yet there was something new now. A subtle shift, like a small crack in the darkness, though Ayaan hardly noticed it at first. It was so faint, so fragile, that it barely registered amidst the heavy weight of his pain. But it was there. A flicker. A glimmer. It came one quiet afternoon, when Ayaan had forced himself to leave the house for the first time in weeks. The world outside seemed to have moved on completely, leaving him behind. The streets were filled with the usual hum of life, cars driving by, people walking in pairs, children laughing and running after one another. The sound of the world felt distant, almost unreal, as if it belonged to someone else. Ayaan had no destination in mind. He simply needed to get away from the walls of his home, from the memories that haunted every corner, every room. His steps were slow, deliberate, as he walked through the park near his house, the path lined with trees that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. The breeze was gentle, brushing against his skin with an unfamiliar softness. It was the first time in weeks that he had truly felt the air around him, the warmth of the sun, the coolness of the breeze. The sensation, though small, was like a lifeline. It was the first time he realized that he could still feel something other than pain. He breathed in deeply, the air filling his lungs, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to be present. Not just lost in his thoughts, not just caught in the storm of his emotions, but here. In this moment, he sat down on a bench near a small pond, his eyes watching the water ripple as a few ducks glided lazily across its surface. The world continued on around him, indifferent to the brokenness he felt. But something about it, the simple beauty of the scene, made him pause. Ayaan closed his eyes, letting the sound of the water and the distant voices of people fade into the background. His thoughts began to drift, as they always did, to Meher. He could see her in his mind's eye, her smile, the way she had looked at him with such love, the way she had made everything feel okay, even when life was difficult. It was in these moments that he would feel the weight of her absence the most, the stark, painful reality that she was gone. But this time, something shifted within him. A small thought, like a whisper, floated through his mind. She wouldn't want me to stay like this. She wouldn't want me to stay lost in this darkness. Ayaan opened his eyes, his breath catching slightly. The thought was strange, foreign almost. Could it be true? Could he really start to think about moving forward? Was it possible to heal when everything inside him screamed against it? He didn't have an answer. He wasn't ready to promise himself anything. But for the first time in weeks, he felt something different. A possibility. It was as if the tiniest seed of hope had been planted within him, so small that it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't a loud, resounding breakthrough, but a quiet realization that perhaps, just perhaps, he could take the next step. That life could, at some point, be worth living again. For the first time since Meher's death, Ayaan made a decision. He would go back to his work, back to teaching. Not because he thought it would erase the pain or bring back the life he had lost, but because it was something he could still do. A small part of himself still remembered how it felt to teach, to connect with his students, to feel like he was making a difference in the world. Maybe that could help him find his way back to himself. Maybe it would give him a reason to get up each morning. He didn't know how long it would take, or if it would even work. But he knew that if he didn't try, if he didn't take this small step, he would be trapped in the same cycle of grief forever. That evening, when he returned home, Ayaan picked up the phone and called the school. "Rashid," he said, his voice steady but soft, "I'm ready to come back. I think I'm ready to teach again." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Rashid spoke. "Ayaan, are you sure? You've been through a lot." "I know," Ayaan replied, his voice firm. "I'm not saying it will be easy. I don't expect it to be. But I think it's time." Rashid's voice softened. "I'm proud of you, Ayaan. You don't have to do this alone, you know. We're all here for you." Ayaan smiled faintly, the first smile he had managed in weeks. "I know. Thank you." As he hung up the phone, a strange feeling washed over him, a mix of uncertainty and relief. The path ahead was unclear, but he had taken the first step. And that in itself felt like progress. The glimmer of hope he had felt earlier wasn't gone. It had become something more, a small but real possibility for the future. A future where, one day, the pain might ease and he might once again find purpose in the world. Ayaan stood in the middle of his living room, the weight of the past still heavy on his heart, but, for the first time in a long while, not all-consuming. Meher's absence was still a wound he didn't know how to heal, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could learn to live with it. To live for the both of them. The house felt a little less empty now, as if the possibility of moving forward had made a tiny crack in the walls of grief, letting a little light in. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The first day back at school was harder than Ayaan had imagined. He had hoped that returning to the classroom, to the familiar faces of his students, would provide a sense of normalcy, a return to the life he had known before everything had been torn apart. But as he walked through the hallways, Passing the bulletin boards, the classrooms, and the empty corridors, a deep, suffocating emptiness settled over him once again. His heart raced as he stood outside his classroom door, hand on the handle. The door felt heavier than it ever had before, like it was holding him back from something he wasn't sure he was ready for. The weight of the world, of his grief, seemed to follow him everywhere, lurking in every shadow, every corner. What am I doing here? The thought gnawed at him, twisting his insides. I shouldn't be here. I'm not ready for this. But then, as though guided by some force outside himself, he opened the door and stepped inside. The classroom, once a place where he had felt confident and in control, now felt foreign. The desks, the chalkboard, the neatly arranged bookshelves, they all seemed to mock him, reminding him of the person he used to be. The person who had been happy. The person who had a life he could rely on. Good morning, Mr. Ayaan. A chorus of voices rang out as his students looked up at him with eager faces. For a moment, he froze, unsure how to respond. Their smiles, their energy, their bright eyes, they were all so full of life, so full of hope. It felt like a cruel contrast to the storm swirling inside of him. Good morning, everyone, he managed, his voice quiet, strained. He forced a smile, though it felt unnatural on his face. The smile of someone who was pretending that everything was okay when inside, nothing felt okay at all. As the students began settling into their seats, Ayaan placed his bag on the desk and tried to focus. The lesson was simple enough, reviewing the material they had covered in his absence. But the words on the board, the formulas, the sentences, they all seemed to blur together. He couldn't concentrate. He could feel his thoughts drifting, the pull of his grief threatening to overtake him. His hands trembled as he picked up the chalk, his mind racing with memories of Meher. She had always been so full of life, so full of energy, always so sure of herself. It had been impossible not to feel her warmth, her love, even in the toughest of times. But now, in this room, in this space, it was like an ocean of emptiness had washed over everything. And Ayaan, standing in the center of it all, felt like a ghost, someone who no longer belonged. As he wrote on the board, one of the students raised their hand. Ayaan nodded, trying to snap himself back into the present. Yes, Selena? He asked, his voice strained. Mr. Ayaan, she said hesitantly, are you okay? The question hit him like a punch in the chest. The weight of it, the truth that hung behind her simple words, threatened to break him. Am I okay?
No.
No, he wasn't okay. He would never be okay. Not without Meher. He swallowed hard, fighting to keep his emotions in check. I'm fine, he said, his voice betraying him. It was a lie, but it was the only answer he could give. Let's get back to the lesson. But inside, everything was crumbling. The walls he had tried to put up, the walls he had tried to keep between his grief and the world, were cracking. The mask he had put on for his students, for everyone, was beginning to slip. The rest of the day passed in a blur of faces and words he barely heard. The students' questions, their laughter, their conversations, it all felt so distant, so irrelevant to the pain that consumed him. It was as if he were watching it all from a distance, as if he were no longer a part of their world. He was simply going through the motions, waiting for the day to end, for the quiet of the night to return. At lunch, Ayaan found himself walking alone to the teacher's lounge, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. He wasn't hungry, but the need to escape the classroom, to be away from the ever-present gaze of his students, was overwhelming. When he entered the lounge, he didn't bother greeting anyone. He walked to the far corner, sat down at an empty table, and stared at the wall in front of him. His mind wandered again, slipping back into the familiar darkness. It was like a heavy blanket that he couldn't shake off, no matter how hard he tried. Every time he thought he was starting to get a grip, the pain came rushing back, and he would find himself trapped once again in that endless cycle of grief. The thought of Meher haunted him in the quiet moments. He could still remember the sound of her voice, the way she had touched his arm when she comforted him, the way her eyes had looked at him with such understanding. But now she was gone. And with her, a part of him had died too. The door to the lounge opened, and Ayaan looked up, startled. It was Rashid, the principal. His expression was serious, his eyes searching Ayaan's face, as if trying to gauge how he was doing. "Ayaan," Rashid said softly, closing the door behind him. "I know today's your first day back, and I just wanted to check in with you. How are you holding up?" Ayaan felt a surge of emotion rise within him. The question, the concern in Rashid's voice, was too much to bear. He could feel the walls inside him beginning to crack, and for a moment, he thought he might break. But he quickly swallowed it down, forcing the emotion back. "I'm fine," he said again, his voice tighter now. He had to lie. He had to keep pretending. It's a lot. It's been hard." Rashid nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I can only imagine," he said quietly. "But Ayaan, remember, it's okay not to be okay. You don't have to do this alone. There's no shame in asking for help." Ayaan looked away, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. He was tired. So tired of pretending, of fighting the demons inside. But he didn't know how to stop. How could he ask for help when he felt so broken? How could he show anyone the extent of the pain he carried? "I'll be all right," Ayaan finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need time." Rashid gave him a small, understanding nod. "You take all the time you need. But don't shut people out, Ayaan. Don't isolate yourself. You're not alone in this." As Rashid left, Ayaan sat in the quiet, the words lingering in the air. He had heard them before, from others, from friends and family, but today they felt different. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Maybe, just maybe, he could let someone in. But the thought terrified him. The battle inside him was fierce, a constant war between wanting to fight through the pain alone and the gnawing feeling that, perhaps, if he opened up, he might start to heal. But for now, Ayaan knew one thing for sure. He wasn't ready. But that didn't mean he never would be.